Yeah, and pre-White Sands, you know? Seriously crazy all that's happened in 2 years. See, it's just... Aya, I mean, she was my best friend. Before you, anyway. All the drilling, the pollution, it took her so quick, man. I barely had the chance to say goodbye. She's never coming back, you know? Never again. She's gone. Effing cancer, effing petrine oil.
I left home at the start of the summer. I wanted to get out of Petria. Like you, I think. My dad thinks I'm on a big road trip. Truth is, I'm never going back home again. To have a normal life? My dad says I'm lucky because I have a privileged life here. But that life disgusts me, especially now that I know... never mind.
This whole thing with Mama Bear has brought up the past. And Connie. Well, Connie was the love of my life. But she died 10 years ago in the peak collapse. She was my everything, Youngblood. You should have seen her. Oh yeah. I got dozens in Mr. Grizzly. Over there. Well, she was young and committed, like me. We were in the brigades together. And beautiful. So goddamn beautiful. Oh, I'll miss her for the rest of my days.
At some point, I looked down and there was my son, silent, covered in dust, looking up at me. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I picked him up and brought him home with me. I just had to make sure he was going to be safe. I had to. I looked in the papers for months after, searched the missing children reports every day. There was nothing. It's not unusual for brigades to cut ties with family. I do. What other explanation is there? I guess I deserve all this. I kept the truth from my baby.
It's just... I don't know my parents. Not my real parents, anyway. You know the attack in '86? In '86, the brigade set off a bomb that killed hundreds of people at the wall, including my bio parents. The really sad part is, I got no memories of them. None. No matter how hard I try, they're probably gone. You know, buried underneath the rocks. But I want to find out as much about them as I can.
Because this place might have some important information. There's a psycho after Sonia, and we need to protect her.
Yeah, sweet Sonia's in danger.
You could say that.
Yeah.
For your information, Aunt Sonia doesn't like herself very much either. Something bad happened once. Really bad. 10 years ago, a young girl died during one of my broadcasts. There was an explosion, and she was under the mountain peak. I tried to save her as the rocks came down. I did. But by the time I got there, well, it was too late.
Well, they took Lola, is why. Lola was my daughter. The brigades took her away from me. When the day came for the attack in '86, they sent her and some other members to the wall. The detonation didn't go as planned, I guess, and she was buried beneath the rocks.
Road 96 is an indie narrative role-playing game made by DigiArt that covers many themes such as loss, trauma, mistakes, moving on, and letting go. Its visual and written storytelling offers compelling arguments, stances, and ideas that can leave the player with some food for thought. There's a lot of discussion that goes around within this game, the most common things I've seen being how community affects the world as a whole, how you can be the change in the world, or even it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. All these are very true within the game, and I think this game in particular uses elements and story to its advantage to convey these messages. One concept that is brought up a lot in this game is grief, more often the grief that follows death. This concept is nothing new, but it can be presented in many different ways across all forms of media. Whether it be overtones, undertones, imagery or dialogue, characters or settings, you can approach this subject in many different ways. All forms of media can present different discussions of grief, but honestly I think video games have a strong advantage overall in covering such topics. It can be as long as you want or as short as you want, and the player can come back to it at any time and easily digest the information, or continue where they left off, and they won't feel bombarded or be left with too little information than what they were initially expecting in a set runtime. That is just my opinion though, and it does vary greatly on what form of medium is better to tell the story. As a whole, I think that any form of media can be valuable in creating and presenting these messages. However, Road 96 and its universe shows grief in a rather unique way. Or rather, it shows a subset of grief. In this case, disenfranchised grief. For those who don't know, disenfranchised grief refers to loss that is not openly acknowledged, socially mourned, or publicly supported. A few examples would be a death of a loved one or the loss of a relationship, and then experiencing the grief that follows afterwards, and then gaining little to no support from others. Generally speaking, society will lump the process of grieving in 5 different stages. The stages being denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And these stages have often been viewed as a linear process. Some may expect you to move on, or even repress that grief that you feel, especially if there's stigma around the said loss or if you don't express your grief in the way society expects you to. But this obviously couldn't be farther from the reality of grief. Pain will still stick with us, even if we pass the so-called acceptance stage. Progress is not linear, and you will have setbacks, and you can feel these stages at any point, repeatedly. However, not everyone in society will acknowledge this. And when society does not acknowledge your loss or grief, it can lead you into adopting unhealthy coping mechanisms, as well as develop mental health issues or even lead to physical symptoms or physical health issues. And as we see in the Road 96 universe, disenfranchised grief plagues us more than we realize. For all the characters, to some extent, they're going through the loss of someone or something surrounded by stigma. While they all stem from one issue primarily, their grief may be the result of some other underlying factors and situations. Some may be managing their grief well, and the grief may be affecting them differently. However, some are more worse off than others. And as you learn more about the character's story, I think they're all easy to understand and sympathize with in some way. At the very least, you get a clear understanding as to why they are the way that they are and how they got there. Before we get into the video, I just want to quickly lay out the structure. Firstly, I will be examining Petria as a whole and how the attack of 86 defined the country, and how society within Petria likely views grief as a whole. Next, I will be covering the characters' backstory and what happens to them, both in the games and the books, meaning that there will be spoilers for the books and the games of Road 96. Clarifying real quick, for this analysis, I do include Kaito from Mile Zero. This video will also use some information from the Road 96 documentary, which I recommend checking out as well, and I will also be using information from the official Discord server. Names will be covered out of respect for the users as necessary. Then, I will be covering how their trauma and grief impacts the story and how they go against society's traditional view of grief. The last section of the video will be discussed more later on as the video comes to a close. This video technically counts as a second part to the ranking video, which I will link in the description below. It isn't necessary to watch that video before this one, but it does offer some further analysis with both gameplay and a bit of character and narrative analysis of the game. Some points made in that video will be referenced here. I'm also still proud of that video, so please watch it, I'm begging. During the video, I bring up real life evidence or connections, whether it be social or mental, to help further the points mentioned in the video, which is why information coming from the documentary or Discord server may be few and far between, since this video is basically built upon research and making connections within the books and the games. Discussions such as racism, sexism, drug and alcohol use, trauma, brief mentions of hitting and child abuse, manipulation, grooming, self-harm / suicide topics will be in the video. While they all don't get into graphic detail, and I will be placing appropriate trigger warnings and timestamps when it's needed, I wanted to give a brief heads up. I apologize in advance if I get information incorrect or if I say something incorrect. I will clarify anything in post-editing through text or recording if necessary. Much like my previous video, I also recommend checking out these videos as well, since they will be referenced more towards the end of the video. And just for a quick reference, here's the overall timeline of the 4 main products for the Road 96 universe. The Road 96 prologue book takes place on September 8th through the 9th, 1986, with a few days after the election. Mile Zero takes place from May 1st, 1996 to May 6th, 1996. A Battlefield takes place from May 6th, 1996 to July 3rd, 1996. And Road 96 takes place from June 1st, 1996 to September 9th, 1996, not counting how long the election lasts for in the epilogue when Zoe narrates the ending. There's some small minor days before and during the timeline, but I just wanted to display the overall timeline for the characters. With all this in mind, let's take a look at the country Petria. The game takes place in Petria. While it doesn't specify in the game, it's indirectly explained that Tyrak has been around since 1976, in the prologue book, likely during the 1976 election, assuming election times still follow the 10-year limit. According to Connie, Tyrak invented the Black Brigades in order to win the election in 1976, and Tyrak has since then led the country into producing media that favors him, both fictional and in news outlets, and has established heavy police forces, especially at the newly built wall. He even makes holidays such as St. Tyrak's Day for every Tuesday, and as we see in Mile Zero, shrines and times dedicated to praying to the shrines for him.
Attention! Tyrak Appreciation Time has begun. Find your nearest Tyrak statue and pay your respects.
During the inauguration of the wall on September 9th, 1986, Connie and John try to hit Tyrak with the truck, but Tyrak survives. He tells the minister to set off the explosions that are used on the mountain peak to prevent avalanches, resulting in the peak collapsing, leading to over 200 deaths, and possibly more injuries. Side note, with the wall, there is a connection to the Berlin Wall. The wall was designed to prevent people from escaping to the west from East Berlin. This furthers Tyrak's goal of heavily controlling Petria and wanting to keep citizens in. This is also backed up by Young's trip to Poland and how some of the devs from 11 Bits lived through the Iron Curtain era, which is how he got political inspiration for the game. There's also connections to North and South Korea, such as through the workers' tests made later on by 1996 for citizens to take, posters and propaganda, and escape underneath the trucks too, as per this game file title. You can also make the claim that the wall is connected to Mexico and the United States, with Mexican immigrants trying to cross the border. But since we don't see it from the other country's perspective, we can't really determine if that country is against teen or adults crossing in Petria, how aware they are of the situation, and what registering to be a citizen for that country is like. Continuing on, the brigades had originally planned to use an explosive device to kill Tyrak. However, the truck that carried the bomb did not make it to the meetup area. That is when the brigades decided to use the truck to kill Tyrak. And then the explosives were detonated. Tyrak had originally planned to do this anyways to eliminate brigades. The country already had seeds of division, but the attack of 86 cemented that divide even more. In Petria during the next decade, there's debate between the citizens on whether the brigades caused the collapse or if the government did it. Regardless of what side you were on, it is still something that everyone in the country is hurting from in some way. Now, bring up real-world events. One well-known event that some may make the connection to is the 9/11 attack against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. I bring this up in passing because the aftermath of the attack did cause rippling effects. 9/11 not only caused security increase among airports and important locations, but it undoubtedly caused racial profiling among Middle Eastern individuals, whether they were terrorists or not. Even before the attack of 86, Tyrak enforced the idea of foreigners taking Petrian jobs, which often gets thrown around in America, and also the fact that he created the brigades in order to win the election for voter intimidation. But now that they are real, he further uses them to describe their actions as terrorism against the country. President Tyrak, along with the stations and forces that he controls and owns, uses fear-mongering and assumptions to cast doubt into the public. He constantly has posters that promote his greatness and encouraging civilians to speak out when they notice potential brigade activity. This is especially used during election time when Flores announced her candidacy. Tyrak is also against teens, and possibly adults, it's not mentioned often, trying to reach the border and cross it, and enforce the idea and law that you cannot leave the country. President Tyrak, along with GNN, then lumped Flores supporters and black brigades together. In general, you often see everything in this country painted as black and white, causing a visible divide within the country. In reality, within the game, there are mixed ideologies, such as the brigades disliking Flores or Flores supporters who think that the brigades are responsible for the attack in 86. It's important to know that you will find most Tyrak supporters in the rich, gated community of White Sands, but you also find some secret pro-Flores supporters and brigade supporters, or even brigades themselves, in the dormitories where the workers work for the residents of White Sands, though they receive harsh punishment and arrestment when they are found. Otherwise, it's more spread out in other parts of the country, though I am assuming that there could be specific areas or hubs that are more Tyrak-centered or Flores-centered, or even brigade-centered, such as how the fossil gas stations appear to be run or visited by those who favor Tyrak, and the motel in Suspicious Minds is run by a brigade and seemingly has residents that dislike cops or support Flores. Besides the few cases of seeing these types of NPCs or background characters within the books and games, this is where the main characters of Road 96 stand out, besides the aspect of how their stories are loosely connected or directly connected with one another. Not only do most of them have mixed or varied ideologies, thoughts, and opinions, but you also see directly how the attack has affected them in various ways. And while their background is more fleshed out because they are main characters, you can argue that because the country is so cut and dry in how they view the attack, that their different backgrounds and viewpoints make them stand out the most. They all struggle with grief that they cannot adequately express, not to a lot of people anyway. In short, the peak collapsing is important in establishing the characters' cases of grief. The politics presented in the Road 96 universe furthers this concept greatly, and warps the grief into becoming disenfranchised grief. With all this in mind, let's get on to the characters.
Z, I'm poor. That's why I have, like, the only basement apartment in White Sands. Dude, you live between Tyrak and Sonia Sanchez. It's absurd.
Kaito Lin is a character from Mile Zero, who you play as for half of the game. He comes from Colton City, a much poorer city in comparison to where he and his parents live now, which is White Sands, a gated community where a lot of rich people live. He's still tormented by the loss of Aya, who died due to cancer. It is stated that the oil drills likely did not help with her condition either. Considering what the town looks like as we play Mile Zero and see it through its brief ride, it's safe to assume that the lower class citizens lived there, and that healthcare was likely a luxury that only few could afford. He and his parents work as workers and assistants to those living in White Sands. They themselves live in dormitories, and Kaito does not go to school. We find out that he's working for the brigades, as it is a way for him and his family to get out of Petria. And the main thing they have to do to secure their freedom is to aid John and Robert in getting the file that proves Tyrak is guilty of detonating the explosives.
Look, young blood, the situation being what it is, your parents gotta grab the file tonight before the cops close in. Well, we don't have a choice. Not if you and your parents want to help us.
Mile Zero shows that it wasn't originally Zoe that had the file first. Towards the end of the game, just as Kaito is about to deliver the papers to Robert, John quickly states that Kaito needs to get the passports first, then give the file second.
But some advice before I roll out of here. Get the IDs before you give Robert the file, okay? Nah, I don't think so. Just don't take anything for granted, alright?
Kaito's parents hide the file, and whether or not Kaito chooses to join the brigades, Kaito still has to retrieve the file for Robert, either because he is a brigade or because Robert threatens him and his parents. However, he is confronted by his scorned Zoe, who either fully calls the cops on Kaito or doesn't, and either way still takes the file and then they fight. Kaito's fate at the end of the game can differ depending on whether the cops were called and if Kaito joined the brigades. His fate in About a Girl can differ as well, from him living to him dying. It's overall rather ambiguous. Honestly, Kaito is a slightly different example compared to most of the other characters. As I mentioned earlier, the peak collapsing is everyone's source of grief. With Kaito, it doesn't state if he lost anyone during the peak collapse. However, he is still wronged by Petra because Aya died due to having cancer, and considering that they were living in an oil-ridden, poverty city, it worsened her condition, and she likely couldn't afford some type of health care.
I mean, this story also describes Colton City as like a paradise. Z, it's not like that at all. There's poverty and suffering, and it's just kind of falling apart. That's why Aya died. The pollution there gave her cancer.
Many of the residents and police officers treat Kaido and his family with contempt, making indirect comments to Zoe.
It's that boy, isn't it? The son of the groundskeeper and maid? I see. Zoe, a girl like you, and a boy like that. I don't know if...
Bro, you want to say that, my good ear? Or directly to Kaido, such as when this police officer makes this comment to Kaido.
Son. Careful, boy. I could take you in for a comment like that.
Kaido's parents also get faced discrimination a lot.
Cyrus and his Tai Chi cult are always giving my dad a hard time.
Maybe you could fill in for Kaito, Mrs. Lin.
My shift's about to start.
Now, are you raising your voice, Mrs. Lin? Well, we need the labor, but I don't trust them. Who knows what they were doing before?
What I'm talking about.
Like I said, we got a tip. We're just following up on it. Well, that's where the brigades come from, isn't it? If the shoe fits, right?
Bro, say this all my good, or why don't you? Regarding talking to police, this also furthers the idea that people of color need to be careful with how they speak to the police officers. I mean, it took Zoe a fat second to be pulled up by the cop in the no concession encounter in Road 96. That cop was quick to make a comment how he could arrest Kaido for just making a comment. Towards the end of the second act of the game, police officers interrogate Kaido under suspicion that he could be a brigade, which he is. But the police immediately went after those living in the dormitories. Racism and classism is very much apparent here, with many hurdles going against Kaido and his family. Although Kaido never suffered the loss of someone in the attack, he isn't able to vent about his loss of Aya, except to his parents and Zoe. And to Jared, because it actually is implied that he has spoken to him in the game before. We could argue that the attack did halter the country's progression in specific areas, as we see many cases of resources having gone into enhancing border forces and funding the police and better off communities. And it's just overall benefiting the 1%. Meanwhile, many buildings and areas have discontinued construction. It wouldn't be far off to assume that healthcare both hasn't progressed, and is likely being shielded off to those who actually can afford it. Healthcare and other luxuries may only be guaranteed to those living as full-on residents in White Sands, who both have the money and appropriate ideology for it. Much like with the workers' test, you can only leave if you reach certain requirements, one of which obviously not being a black brigade, and of course having support for your country. Even then, you're cut out of a good pay. Now, being stuck in a rich neighborhood almost isn't any better, or it's worse in many other regards. While I did mention that there are some brigade and florist supporters along with actual brigades living within White Sands, if you want to vent about your issues about Petra's government, how they need to be doing more to help the little people, trying to do that in a location where they got mini golf in one of the cul-de-sacs, along with numerous Tyrak shrines and cameras everywhere, it isn't the best place to get therapy, or get a lending ear. Not a lot of NPCs are considerate of Kaito's position, as we see in the game.
Kaito is apparently ill and can't deliver my papers. Convenient, right? You know workers, Madame Zoe. Not always reliable, are they?
So I really doubt if you try to talk to others about Aya, he won't garner that much sympathy. I mean, his parents got yelled at and scolded for not completing certain tasks. Anzu doesn't explain to the woman why Kaito cannot deliver papers, only offers apologies. I mean, Kaito probably told her that he was sick, but she could probably see right through that, assuming he lied about it to her in the first place. Given how much Kaito's parents are attentive to Kaito's well-being, I'm sure that she's at least acutely aware of why he's upset and can't deliver the papers that day. In general, many of the citizens are well off, and higher class citizens don't express discomfort in how they live. Mainly that only comes from those who deviate against Tyrek in some way. And the residents put immense pressure on the workers to be consistent in their work and obedient. This includes Kaito and his parents. Overall, while we don't have the full picture as to how Kaito met the brigades, and we don't see if he had any personal loss within the peak collapse, we do know that Kaito's grief at the loss of Aya and how society is pushed him into joining the brigades. And they're also placed in a bad position with the brigades, because John isn't as headstrong to help Kaito since he hasn't met Alex yet, which I will explain what I mean more later. It doesn't offer larger help like actually overseeing Robert handing Kaito the passports. Robert doesn't treat Kaito or Kaito's parents with much respect either, even if Kaito does join the brigades. And clearly in About a Girl, we see that he's about to be transferred to the pits. So, assuming the ending where he went with Robert is canon, he was quickly left to defend for himself. At least that's what it feels like anyways. His status pushed him into hating and blaming the government. Treated with contempt in many ways, and possibly feeling guilt over Aya's death, and the separation and falling out he had with Zoe towards the end of the game. He's the most recent addition to the lonely cast of Road 96. And while he doesn't get the chance to vent to a no-name player, he still gets the chance to vent to Zoe when we play as her. And maybe he does get a hopeful ending, thanks to us. Or rather to Zoe.
Have a life. My dad thinks I'm lucky to have a big house and go to a prep school, but I'm not. Believe me. Yeah, you could say that.
Zoe Muller, who is the main character of Road 96 and the protagonist of Mile Zero and About a Girl, has a complicated upbringing. Daughter of the Minister of Oil, she was there to witness the attack of 86 at 8 years old. Her and her father have a very strained relationship. In the prologue book, we meet her when she was left behind at a gas station. You then have to bring her back to her father at the wall. She has an absent mother, who we learned left her and her father not long after the attack occurred. In the About a Girl book, it is revealed that her mother, Sarah, is alive, but is missing in action, as she is likely a brigade, and knew of what her father and Tyrek did. Yet she still sent birthday cards to Zoe for a couple of years after she left, but eventually crossed the border entirely, basically cutting off communication between her and Zoe. Although she lives in White Sands, and comes from a rich, privileged lifestyle, she is neglected and restricted in many ways. Her father, Frederick Muller, hired her a bodyguard at the start of the summer. Her bodyguard was actually Adam.
There you are, Madam Zoe. Ah! Oh, sorry.
Woo! Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about. Woo!
Last name to be revealed as Kopchak. The last name has nothing to do with anything, by the way. And not only that, her father forbids her from hanging out with Kaito. As we see how Kaito and his parents are treated with contempt for classist and racist reasons, there's definitely more to it when her father is preventing her from hanging out with him. It is also stated that there are cameras all around Zoe's house. None of this keeps Zoe in line. It's common for kids to find a workaround to parents restricting their behavior, or who are otherwise raised by authoritative parents. Zoe will sneak out and she will do things that she is not supposed to do. Despite their differences, she and Kaito are friends throughout the beginning of the game, and have been for a while. It isn't until Zoe sees Kaito talking with John and being secretive about it, and learns that Kaito is a brigade, that it puts a strain on their relationship. Not to mention, every time the attack gets brought up, Zoe's breathing gets heavy, and she is likely being put into a panic attack. In Mile Zero, Zoe does offer Kaito's help in getting the files that prove that Tyrek was behind the peak collapse. They both break in. However, when Zoe tosses Kaito the file, he leaves her, with him and his family leaving that night. Even after promising Zoe that they would leave together, because Robert specifically requested that file to be brought in that night. Or else they wouldn't get the passports to leave Petria. Zoe is hurt by this.
I have to go. So, I guess this is goodbye. Have a nice life, see?
You broke your promise. And you used me, Kaito. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. I will find you.
And that next day she escapes White Sands, with revenge in mind, as she tracks down Kaito, aiming to steal the file back as an act of getting back at him. They both get into a fight, and by the end of it, she has the file.
Track you down? Oh, it wasn't that hard, really. I always thought a brigade lair would be cool. But a rest stop? This is kinda lame, Kay. Well, you used me! And you seriously underestimated me. Oh no? You want this file? You'll have to come and...
Also, because not a lot of players know about this, the fight can end to where she and Kaito both mutually stop fighting, and they part ways on better terms, with Kaito giving Zoe the file.
I'm gonna miss you, Z.
I'll miss you too, Kay.
She leaves, and eventually she reads the file, and attempts to contact Kaito. But to no avail. We see more of her side of the story continue on in About a Girl, where a man in a hockey mask is actively stalking her, who we later find out was hired by her father to bring her back home, nearly killing her each time she meets him. Which, by the way, what the fuck? Well, I won't go over About a Girl in full detail. She does meet several of the other characters that the player meets in the game. And at some point towards the end of the book, she eventually confronts her dad, about the man stalking her and about her mom. She's almost taken back home until Stan and Mitch pull a robbery. She escapes, and the cops find her a day later, where we then see her in the third encounter. She is then saved and recruited by the brigades, and then heads to the wall, meeting the 4th teen at the border and either crosses the border or dies. Then she either dies by the end of the game, during election day, or lives to see her country change. For better or for worse. There are many examples where she gets neglected by her father throughout the series, and is treated more as a showcase display, by all accounts. He was probably worried that Zoe was going to end up like her mom if she found out the truth, but that's more speculation on my part. As I mentioned earlier, she was left at the gas station in 1986 on the day of the election when the bombing was originally planned to happen. Her father should have left her home, or not have forgotten that she was there. He could have also stopped the corruption with Petra and go against detonating the explosives and be a good dad, but hey, hindsight is 2020. Indirectly, there's also her father enforcing the idea that her mom left her at a young age. For example, look at the wording of this quote in About a Girl. Your mom abandoned you years ago. That's some pretty harsh wording. Why not use she left us years ago, or something that doesn't highlight the fact that Zoe was left behind or abandoned? Not only that, but we learn that he sent Mike, the guy in the hockey mask, after her mother. And that he knows that she's working with the brigade as well. Talk about a big reason for divorce. In Mile Zero, it's stated that her father has cameras around the house to watch her. And when Adam tries to get into Zoe's room, he's surprised to find that the door is locked. Zoe's father probably expressed to him that he doesn't like her door locked. No locked doors in this house is something that would for sure be said in a restrictive, abusive household. She's a teen. Kid needs her privacy. Sure, she's 18, and that probably constitutes as an adult in Petria, but keyword 18. Ignoring the legal aspect, your brain doesn't finish developing until you're 25. She needs to be respected in that household, as she needs her space and she's going through adolescence still. Plus, I'm willing to bet with how her dad hid massive secrets from her, it's likely a hypocritical rule that he has. I also strongly feel like Zoe getting a bodyguard was more for her father in a way. He probably does have bodyguards already, but I just don't see it as a way to make Zoe feel safe because of some of his wording.
Yes, it is. We need to protect you from those who wish you or me harm.
Plus, if her safety was concerned, wouldn't she have one years back? It doesn't specify if she did. Otherwise, maybe her father would have said something like, I hired a new bodyguard for you. It just doesn't add up to me, I feel like. Continuing on, despite not actually being on a road trip, he enforces the idea onto the public that she is. Most likely to keep up appearances, as we know that isn't the case and that she ran away. But with the way he says it in the encounter, Video Killed the Radio Star, he's using it as a way to boost his credit. And there's smaller times in Mile Zero that Zoe mentions in full or in passing, where he doesn't spend time with her. And how her father overall does not get her, and that she can't have a life because of her lifestyle and because of her dad. Onto her PTSD aspect, Zoe gets sent into a panic attack every time Kaito asks her about more details regarding the attack. It could maybe be classified as an anxiety attack, but I think it's more so the former. And she actively tries to avoid the subject, which is a common symptom of PTSD. She can also come off as irritable when bringing up the attack further, another symptom of PTSD. She also still has nightmares regarding the attack in 86. The ride where she's reliving that day acts as a visual motif into looking into her trauma. How it's warped and slightly distorted. Getting to the wall or finishing the memory is hard. And she isn't even fine by the end of it. She snaps at Kaito for trying to make her relive that moment, telling her that everything she knew was a lie. And then she finds out that Kaito is a brigade. That day she went on an emotional roller coaster. Even if she did have her doubts, having those doubts confirmed is awful. Not only that, but I'm sure Zoe has some form of abandonment and trust issues already. Her dad monitors her as much as he can, or gets someone else to do it like Adam. At the same time, he doesn't acknowledge her or spend time with her. Her mom left her at a young age. She finds out all this information within a span of 4 days, gets abandoned by Kaito and his parents, who she really gravitated towards, and makes almost a spur-of-the-moment decision to leave her house and neighborhood on a whim, with little to no plan other than to confront Kaito. She's being forced out of her cage with no preparation, and no real-life experience. She's free, but she's more or less unprepared. And in that time frame, as she's trying to cross the border, she gets mixed up with the Brigades, a group which she not only just recently starts to change tunes with, but still has bad memories associated with them. And while she does have that incentive to stop her father by the end of About a Girl, that's still a massive burden on her. In many aspects, throughout her general story, it's hard for her to vent out these frustrations. Everyone in White Sands held her on a pedestal, but she couldn't talk to most of the workers that lived in the dormitories without just being shunned or revered like a god or a large authority figure. Mentioning her plan to travel outside of White Sands to any patrols or cops there, she's discouraged not to and is not taken seriously.
That is rich. Why would you ever want to do that?
Well, if you wish. But heaven is right here in White Sands, isn't it?
The woman who's trying to force Anzu to deliver the papers doesn't think Zoe can work because the work is beneath her.
Oh heavens, no! This type of work is beneath you!
That's very kind of you.
Are you sure? This is like a job. Oh, no reason.
Bye, Madame Zoe.
Well, here are the papers. Good luck, Madame Zoe.
And she's always kept under a watchful eye by Adam. I argue that if she vented to Sonia, maybe she'd have a chance of being able to voice her frustrations, since she would get it, in a way. But it wouldn't be to the full extent. Especially about Kaito being in the Brigades. And I have my doubts that she'd get the best therapy, even with her status. I doubt she would walk up to her dad and say, hey, I'm having these little attacks every time the attack gets brought up and I have to think about it more, because she hates her dad. And I doubt he'd take it seriously in the mental health aspect. And overall, I think it's safe to assume that the therapy given by Petria could be controlled by the state entirely, if it was offered. Which seems like a stretch, as most mental health places are supposed to be unbiased and all that, but probably not in a country like Petria. I mean, slightly related, but in the smuggler route in Road 96, even if you pay your way to get to the border wall, the cops still come after you. Or if you try to bribe the officer during the workers' test, you still get arrested. I know for sure if someone confessed their brigade in a therapy session, they're going to jail. Maybe Zoe could get ejected therapy, but I imagine if it's about the attack, the most she may get is, well, once Tyrek finds all the brigades and arrests them, then you won't have to worry. Overall, I think they just put greater emphasis on highlighting how great the country is and how everything will be fine. I mean, their movie media for children does. And outside of White Sands, save for a few sparse moments, she's not going to mention who she is, because the cops who know that she's actually missing, or she can get scrutinized. That, or no one believes her entirely. Her status can't protect her in the world outside of White Sands. Under these conditions, it'd be hard for her to vent all at once to anyone about her background and what she's going through. But she is able to find some comforting moments of solace. Either through Kaito, as strained as it becomes in Mile Zero, meeting Alex towards the end of Mile Zero and About a Girl as well, or by meeting the player throughout Road 96. Being able to tell her story to someone across a variety of teens makes her goals in the end more assured. And if she lives, she's able to face Election Day head on, no matter the outcome.
I'm telling you all, violence will do more harm than good.
Funny, don't you think, kid? Funny because John and his girlfriend were the ones who drove the truck to kill Tyrek in '86.
I've changed, Robert.
Yes, you have.
John Ursus, a trucker, has been a brigade for over 2 decades. I'm assuming him being a brigade started in 1985, because of a letter that is found within the game files, from Connie to John. August 8th, 1985. John, I know we don't agree on some things, but I really feel that what we're doing with the brigades is the right thing to do. I hope you'll help us when the time comes. I love you. Connie. While it is stated in Mile Zero that John and Robert started the brigades together, I'm assuming there must have been some turmoil early on, as it is laced within this letter. John isn't perfect. He was much more hardened in the beginning, being a full-time revolutionary. He believed that direct and physical action would be important to stop Tyrek, even calling the Kims pencil neck cowards when they were up on the border on election day, because they wanted to go a more peaceful route. It isn't until Connie dies and years pass that he recognizes that violence will not solve anything. We see him as someone who's still a bit tense in Mile Zero, especially if you as Kaito reveal that you told Zoe that you were a brigade.
The truth now. What? Who? You told the minister's daughter? You got dirt for brains? You better pray she doesn't tell her father. She better not have. Parents' keisters are on the line.
But he's overall still respectful to the Lins, and even warns them to be wary of Robert.
Robert's got the IDs. You'll need them to cross at the border. He just wants to see you first, Youngblood.
Robert wants to see Kaito? What? Why?
Robert's just got a certain way of doing things, particular as they may be. That's not gonna work. Robert wants to see you, Youngblood, not the parents. Just a formality, Youngblood. Just a heads up. Robert probably isn't in a good mood. Rarely is. But don't let it throw you. Before you give Robert the file, okay? Kid, Robert and I started this damn thing together, but sometimes you just gotta look out for numero uno. Know what I mean?
Soon afterwards, he meets Alex, and when he eventually realizes that it is Alex, Naomi and Steven's kid, his thoughts about the brigade strongly change. Throughout Road 96, you see how he constantly expresses issues regarding the brigades.
That was great we freed the teen, but we shouldn't resort to violence. That's not who we are.
You don't have much of a filter, do you?
We're not terrorists. Not yet, anyway.
He constantly expresses his loss of Connie towards the player.
Past. And Connie. Well, Connie was the love of my life. But she died 10 years ago in the peak collapse. She was my everything, Youngblood. You should have seen her. Well, she was young and committed, like me. We were in the brigades together. And beautiful. So goddamn beautiful. Oh, I'll miss her for the rest of my days.
And talks about opportunities he missed in his younger years, or that he might currently be missing, mainly and possibly due to being a brigade.
Oh yeah! Papa Bear wins again! I should have been on the Olympic squad!
Bear, got your ears on? Over.
Ooh, that's Mama Bear, Youngblood. We got a CB type thing going on. I've never actually met her, but I think I'm in love. I want to ask her out, but I've been out of the game too long. Can you help?
But besides his grievances, he makes a stronger effort to protect Alex as much as he can. All the while trying to build a new relationship with Fanny while protecting his identity and living out his life as much as he can. By the end of the game, he can die, or live, fleeing the country with Fanny and Alex. I argue that John has one of the more healthier mindsets within the game, besides Stan and Mitch, which we'll get into later. If we had to place him on the linear scale of grief, he's more so near the stage of acceptance, but this doesn't mean he's without his hardships. It seems like from the letter mentioned earlier, he didn't want to join the Brigades, or wasn't keen on them like Connie was. Yet he was still swayed into it and was still all for the change that he wanted to bring to Petria after Tyrek was elected. I think it's especially in About a Girl and Road 96 that we see a change with John. I think Mile Zero shows us a John that is still following Robert's orders and only marginally going against him. I think him getting angry at Kaito and saying that his parents' lives are on the line shows that he's still hurting over the Kim's death and doesn't want to see the same thing happen again. When he finally meets Alex and knows that it's Steve and Naomi's kid, that's when he starts to become more protective and outspoken of what Robert does. Robert likely holds Connie's death over John, basically manipulating him to stay, which could be a part of the reason why he sticks around. Adding on to this, Robert openly uses Connie's death and John's guilt to other teens, such as when you're voting for either violence or non-violence in the Let's Get Serious encounter.
Funny, don't you think, kid? Funny because John and his girlfriend were the ones who drove the truck to kill Tyrek in '86.
I've changed, Robert.
Yes, you have.
Or when Kaito is talking to Robert. I'm sure that if he uses this with teens, he uses this against John.
John did he? Nothing but good things, I hope. Does he now? Well, John's been through a lot, you know, with what happened to Connie and everything. Maybe it's messed him up, clouding his thinking. Not sure. But enough about me, eh?
So the only thing that John can do for Kaito's sake is warn him about Robert. Then when Alex comes along, he gets more of a backbone against Robert.
Oh! Listen to me, Robert! You asked a kid to make you a bomb! Are you stupid? If anything happens to him, I'm coming for you! Got me?
And what's worse is that Robert seemingly does not tell John that it's Naomi and Steven's kid that is joining. I discuss it more in Alex's section, but I believe Robert reached out to recruit Alex in some way, knowing that he was their son. So John likely only found out when Alex told him directly. And I think he still stays anyway, to both bring change to Petria, and to ensure that Robert isn't putting Alex or the teens in harm's way, and otherwise keep the brigades balanced. This is how I see it all, anyway. Despite being a major force in the rift he's causing in the brigades, and expressing remorse for how things ended up, and feeling guilt over Connie's death, as well as the Kims and likely Lola's, and getting Kaito and his parents involved, that still wouldn't abscond him from any criticism from how society would likely view him, if he tried to vent out his grievances. Half of the brigades are split, and despite being one of the two leaders, only half are going to understand where he's coming from. And being that Robert is also an overbearing manipulative presence, it could be a smaller amount that understands John. He's also a very much wanted criminal. So, even if he tries to tell the average citizen anything or hint at what he went through, it wouldn't end well for him. Not only that, but Connie in the book was identified as a brigade towards the end. If anyone makes the connection that John knew her, they would likely assume that he was a brigade too, or had associations previously with the brigades. So, either way, he doesn't get a chance to talk about his trauma, despite how he also suffered physical injuries from the attack as well. There's no sympathy for brigades in Tyrek's country, after all. And he does pin the whole attack and the peak collapsing onto himself, since they couldn't take Tyrek out. Any potential brigade sympathizer or Flores supporters could get angry at John for missing Tyrek. So, all in all, that's guilt he's harboring. But, like I mentioned earlier, I still think he has a much more healthier mindset as opposed to the rest of the cast as we meet him. He's picking up the pieces through Fanny and Alex. With Fanny, he has a shot at loving someone again, despite the fact that she's a cop, which does open a hole in the can of worms. And meeting Alex again. For Alex, he probably feels both relief that Naomi and Steven's kid never died, but on that note, now he has to deal with the fact that he's eager to learn information about them, and that he's a Techwoods too, much like his parents. And honestly, there's a chance that he wasn't ready to confront how he felt about the Kims dying, still harboring that guilt. Seeing Alex again likely opened up those wounds as well. That, and indirectly his grief over Connie's death. Election day getting closer doesn't help either. While he does have to worry about the upcoming election and the newly planned protests/attack, he still manages to find ways to work through these issues. Venting to the player in About a Girl likely reaffirms his stance that he wants to be with Fanny in some way, and that he shouldn't deprive himself of happiness, and that he can talk about Connie, because someone will listen. And he realizes with Alex that, in the end, he needs to be more open and honest about Naomi and Steven in order to protect him more from Robert, or the brigades that want him to get more violent. And he achieves this realization through the player's help.
Okay, you can go. I am. You didn't break any law? Those guys were just on a power trip. Sorry I yelled at you like that. Had to make it look real.
Fanny Campbell has been a cop since 1986, stated to be a rookie cop in the book. It is noticeable how new she is in the book, as the reader can see how much she stands out from regular cops, showing more compassion in some cases. Reading an excerpt from the prologue book, you open your eyes to see a policewoman, curvy, hair tied in a bun, much shorter than you, which, now that you're sitting on the car's hood, brings the two of you to eye level. She looks honestly concerned, not the kind of emotional response you typically see in the eye of a cop. She was there at the wall to help guard Tyrak, as well as likely to keep the peace as much as she could. The peak then collapses, to where she meets Alex, and takes him home, looking for any signs of parents looking for him. The Kims are identified as brigades in the book, so at this point, Fanny takes Alex in. A decade passes, and eventually, Fanny tells Alex the truth about his parents, to which he then leaves to look for more information about them. Fanny, during this time or beforehand, is tasked with looking for the transmitter that the brigades are using. Within the decade, she has helped transport the kids to areas where they get transferred to the Iron Pits, where teens are sent to mine if they are caught crossing. Even still through all this, she tries to help the player or teens in any way that prevents their arrest or makes them feel safe. She then heads up to the border on election day to again make sure that the election goes smoothly. She meets Alex by the end of the game and meets John for the first time. It is by this point that she can confirm what she's been doing is still justified and continues to follow in Tyrak's government, or listens to Alex and John, as she openly acknowledges that what she's been doing as a cop is still wrong, even with the time she tries to be considerate towards the players and teens in the series. Throughout the books and the games, she has shown constant disrespect, both by the citizens and police officers. For instance, one example of disrespect is in the prologue book, when she's trying to arrest Lou, who is actually Lupe Flores, as we soon find out at the end of the book, for robbing the Video 99 store. Without taking her eyes off you, she walks backward and picks up the mouthpiece off her radio. 10-4, Archie. Make it quick. I'm kinda busy right now. Well, you have to unbusy yourself because the robbers from the video store are heading your way fast. What? No, she's right in front of me. Cream-colored Goval. Bullshit. We just got description of the perps. They struck again in a motorcycle dealership and bounced with a sidecar. You need to nab them at the 44 junction. But I'm in the middle of an arrest. And you're the only one in the area. So you can play traffic cops later and bring your bad ass to the 44. Copy that, Archie. She hangs up, furious, even though she's going great lengths to hide it. Now she's averting her eyes, sitting back at the wheel. If it's any consolation, I think your ass is just fine. Go fuck yourself. Those last two lines weren't needed per se, but it's a really funny exchange. In Mile Zero, when she's trying to talk to Kaido, she is dismissed by the police officers there.
That's right. Colton loves his dad most. As he should.
How are things looking with the kid over there?
Pretty sure the kid's a BB.
We just don't have enough to bring him in. But give us time.
I see. Peach fuzz. How about some water?
This look like your son, Officer Campbell? Stay out of this.
They're doing okay, kid. Just hang in there, all right?
Zip it.
Fanny, we're letting the parents go. They've paid the fine. Now let the kid go too. Over.
Let the kid go.
What? Already?
And about a girl, when Zoe is detained, Zoe's not nice or considerate to Fanny, which is reasonable on Zoe's part, laying into her about what Tyrek does, which Fanny knows full well what he does, yet she's still trying to be nice to Zoe. In Road 96, there's a Sweet Dreams encounter with the cop.
Just like all the others.
Get him in the van. I'll join you in a sec. Now what about this one?
This one's legit. Works here.
I don't know. Look how dirty she is. Looks like a crosser to me. I see. Know what? You're coming to the station with us.
I'll take it from here.
Yo, what?
I'll book her. Besides, saves you room to pick up another kid.
Fine, I guess.
I also would argue that she doesn't seem to get quicker responses from Central or her precinct whenever she needs them to respond. You could argue that maybe it's because of a bad connection, but other cops seem to get reasonable connections in some of the encounters, besides Firestarter. But even then, that's when that tower gets destroyed. Some comments made by Fanny shows that she is aware that she works for bad cops.
It's just like any other profession. You got your good apples, and you got your bad ones. Look, it's like any other job. You work with people you like, and with people you don't.
Citizens are not willing to talk to her within this game. Case in point being the whole motel and Suspicious Minds. So, all in all, Fanny's caught between a rock and a hard place. Surely after working for a corrupt police force for a long time, there are negative feelings of not venting her anger with her grievances against Tyrek, who she works with, what she does, and to top it off, her sadness regarding Alex leaving makes it all the more worse. There is overall evidence that suggests worsening mental health within cops, where they have higher reports of depression, anxiety, and PTSD. Obviously, have your reservations about the cops. But needless to say, it is important to point out because Petria likely doesn't have good mental health services. Besides my earlier mentionings in Zoe's section, and throughout the video currently, there's further evidence to suggest this. The character Max, who we meet in Sweet Dreams and at the end of the game, ends up going through electric shock therapy for conversion and to be made obedient. While this therapy method is still used to this day, we clearly see that, in the game, it goes to a degree that is beyond a normal or small dosage. Max is pretty much brain dead, not remembering anything about you, and is overall unresponsive. And in general, mental health has really only improved over the last 2 decades. And cops in the game are made to be complicit with Tyrek's orders. Maybe they are aware that the whole attack was staged, maybe not. With any job, you become hardened or numb against anything that might be thrown at you. With Tyrek enforcing laws that aim to target runaway citizens and brigades, no matter the age, it'll make those cops hardened and cruel. The safety of all citizens are put on the back burner when Tyrek's country only wants to preserve those that follow his direct ideology. Getting back to Fanny, as we see, is a special and significant case because she is aware that her son's parents were brigades. Related, but sometime recently in the official server, I ended up giving more of my thoughts about Fanny as a whole, as her ideology and working as a police officer came up. I'm just going to read verbatim what I wrote and show it on screen. I don't think Fanny is ignorant of what goes on. She even says herself at the end of one of the endings that she is aware of what Tyrek does to teens. Sorry. I just had I thought I'm going to keep this in the video. I just had some really bad Jack in the Box. It was actually mid. Speaking of Jack in the Box, you can see the outline of one in the background in some areas for the Some Like It Hot encounter. This cut is related to Road 96 now. It haunts me because the year this game came out, early that year, it gave my 2 weeks notice of Jack in the Box. I can't believe this goes back all to Jack in the Box. This goes all the way to the top. Anyway, continuing on. But she probably isn't aware of Tyrek causing the peak to collapse. She's complicit in many ways, but she will do what she can to help some teens, like the player, to not be arrested. She definitely does continue working as a cop in the interest for her son. I'm sure the pay rate for cops or guaranteed protection and status for her and Alex is why she continues to work as one. This is also just me guessing, but she knew that Alex's parents were Black Brigades, so I'm sure there's a chance that other police officers found out too, and could have possibly been wary of Alex and Fanny, since Fanny adopted him. But again, that's just me theorizing and guessing. Kim, a developer on this game, actually did respond to this point as well. Exactly that. She is torn between doing her job even if she thinks it's wrong, because it protects her family and protecting others, even if this means going against orders. Although Fanny does have strong opinions about the brigades, as she has to confront them on a daily basis. While she can technically protect Alex from road control or dangerous police officers, she can't do much about brigades except following orders to prevent them from attacking, because she is scared Alex would be there at a time of another attack and get hurt. In my ranking video for Road 96, I did also mention how Fanny, being a cop in the 90s, and being both a woman and black, is likely aiding into her stress within her job. And with all that, I think there's most definitely racial prejudice against Fanny and Alex. We see some people of color cops in Mile Zero, and even some women cops. But, man, it's mostly white and male dominated. Editing Sam here. There's real life statistics that I show on screen, but I went ahead and counted the number of cops/road control we see or hear in both games. This is not counting the books or guards in certain encounters like Tyrek's party or the agent in Thieves of the Temple, or Secret Services and guards in Mile Zero. Starting out from Road 96, we see that Fanny is the only visible black cop. Technically, if you count Central responding, which I did, there are 2 other female cops, with the second one being in road control when he reached the border with one of the teens and come across a roadblock. Now, going off the list of male cops in Road 96, assuming I did the math correctly, there's a total of roughly 45 male cops. The total number of cops, including the female cops, add up to 48. There's 1 in Suspicious Minds, 2 in Sweet Dreams, 2 in Phone Calls, 1 in No Concession, 2 in Firestarter, 3 in Let's Get Serious, 2 at the border wall before choosing an escape route, 3 for Sony's interview, 2 in LFO, 1 in Better Be Good to Me, 1 in the tunnel escape route, 3 in the smuggler route, 2 in the truck route, 3 in the test route, 4 in Zoe's last encounter, and 11 towards the ending. For Road 96, the male cops make up of 94%, and the female cops make up of 6%. The male cops look predominantly white, but to be fair, it doesn't specify. But if we're going under the assumption that Fanny is the only visible black cop, that would make it a 98% of white cops to the 2% of black or people of color cops. So really, really not a good ratio. Looking at Mile Zero, there's a total of 59 cops within the game. This game does have a more quote-unquote balanced out police force, and I say this with a thin veil of sarcasm, with male cops making up 66% of the force, and women making up 34% of the force. This includes Fanny too, by the way. The cops in this game are 73% white, and 27% black or people of color. There's a chance that, especially for Mile Zero, I did miscount, and again, I'm not counting the amount of cops in both books. But we see how they, especially with the male to female percentage, do fairly match. So I think it's safe to assume that there's some merit to these real life statistics. Did I spend a good hour on this? Yes. Did it hurt opening up Excel for non-school related purposes? Also yes. But it does further my point on how Fanny is in the minority in every aspect within her job, and how it harms her. Anyway, back to the video. It's important to note that depression is also common within people of color. And African Americans and Latinos are most likely to be at risk for depression. Fanny obviously would be classified as African American, but I think it's important to mention this because Petria does have similarities to the US, more so with the geographical landscapes and some political policies. And while Petria might be considered a melting pot within that world, that doesn't prevent racial discrimination, especially when Petria was initially built upon that. So in short, there's a lot going against Fanny. She basically started her career thinking that she would protect others. But as the orders make her progressively feel like she's not protecting anyone but Tyrek and the government, and is overall causing more harm towards the citizens, she starts doubting. But she can't quit now. So we tie in the fact that Fanny both hates her job now and is experiencing prejudice at the same time, plus that mental health likely isn't that great, and Alex leaving home, she's not catching a break. With the little respect she gets from her fellow officers and from the citizens of Petria, and her position of being a mother to a son whose parents were brigades, it doesn't give her room for sympathy. She tries to do what she can to uphold her values that she started out with and kept as a mother, but Petria's police and political system is trying to force her to be a hardened, soulless cop, who is in need of therapy that Petria likely does not offer. The talks that she does have with Alex offer her some peace of mind, because she knows that Alex is safe. There are times in the About a Girl book where you can mention that Alex is working for the brigades, and even in Road 96 as well, but she doesn't believe you. I honestly have a general theory that she does know Alex is working for the brigades, or suspect she's contacting them. I mean, she knew his parents were brigades. No one else tried to claim Alex as their next of kin. How else is Alex going to be learning about his parents? So, Assuming that she does know that he's in the brigades or worries about it every night, which she probably already does, that does aid into her stress and her fear. She does get a bit of a distraction when talking to John, even getting a chance at a date life. Honestly, we don't know too much about what she's done in the past or if she has any other friends outside of work. So it's a chance for her to feel some comfort that she can look forward to, especially since she states that her job can be quiet. Even if in the end it's revealed to her that John is working with the brigades. We do only get to see her vent really once in the game, which is in the Infinity encounter. But Fanny does strike me as someone who's reserved about her emotions anyways, or just reserved in general. She doesn't appear on the Sonya show whenever she gets involved with an accident or incident with the brigades. It's either Sonya reporting it or another police officer. But when we do see her vent, it's really opening, and we feel for her. And we do know that it's a relief for her, since she does seem to leave in a better mood after the player talks with her, relieving some of the burden and the grief that she's held on to.
The really sad part is, I got no memories of them. None. No matter how hard I try. I just have this picture. It's from GNN, the day of the attack. They appear for just 1 sec. I learned a lot about computers enhancing this.
Alex Campbell, originally Alex Kim, makes his first appearance in the prologue book with Naomi and Steven. Through subtext, Naomi and Steven are likely foreigners or have some foreign connections, from before Tyrek was president, as their car has imported foreign goods. His parents are very good with engineering and technology, and they are referred to as yuppies by John, originally a derogatory term coined in the 80s, which describes a group of people who are young urban professionals, implying that they are considerably well off. Originally, they built a bomb for the brigades. However, Naomi especially had expressed disdain for the bomb idea, as they had documents that they wanted to release to the press in '86 that proved that Tyrek was building camps to send citizens to, and they wanted to release these instead of using the bomb. Alex is shown early on to have a massive intellect, as he learned how to speak backwards at the age of 4. Naomi and Steven are killed in the peak collapse, and Fanny finds Alex and adopts him. By the summer of '96, Fanny finally tells Alex the truth about his parents. Alex eventually meets up with John and Robert to learn more about his parents, become a brigade himself, despite being raised by a cop and thereby getting more direct messages of Tyrek running his country well. At least, I'm assuming that he was exposed to that ideology at a young age. And as I brought up earlier, Alex could have been facing general hardships due to his identity if other cops knew his parents were brigades, and then treated him with contempt. Throughout About a Girl in Road 96, we see how he does odd jobs for the brigades, such as creating fake emitters and watching out for where the cops are. Eventually, Robert gets him to make plans for a bomb, both for small attacks and finally for Election Day. John can try to dissuade him from building the bomb, which could be successful or unsuccessful.
Don't do it. You don't want blood on your hands. Believe me, I know.
I just want info on my parents. No one will tell me anything.
I don't know where to start. Naomi and Steven. Those were your parents' names.
Naomi and Steven? What you did? That hurt me, John. We had a deal. I trusted you.
I know. I'm sorry, kid. Please forgive me.
I want to know more, but not like this. Can we meet soon? And you'll tell me everything you know?
Yeah, I promise, kid.
Okay. Bye, John.
See you soon, kid. Don't do it, kid. You don't want blood on your hands. Believe me, I know.
John's been listening this whole time? You lied to me! Just leave me alone!
Your parents. I don't know where to start. Naomi and Stephen. Those were your parents' names.
Naomi and Stephen?
Yeah, Naomi and Stephen. And I know more. I'll tell you.
What you did? That hurt me, John.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Alex. I really am.
I want to know more. But not from you. I'll ask Robert.
Please, Alex! No! Damn it, damn it, damn it!
Either way, Alex learns by the end of the game more about his parents and why certain information about them was being kept from him. Primarily by John, because he didn't want Alex to end up like them. Alex then either joins the fight towards the end of the game, and either lives or dies, or he leaves with John and Fanny to cross the border. Alex is only 14. For 10 years, he had to hear from Fanny that she never knew who they were. And no matter how hard he tries to remember his parents, he can't. In this article, it says that trauma that occurs at a young age can't block out memories leading up to the event or the event itself. And it can lead to a lost sense of identity. This, paired with the fact that he knows that he's adopted, and how cops and others who may know about his parents treat him and his mother differently, may make him feel like he has no identity. Adoption in itself can lead to many hardships and questions. While Alex doesn't really express it, he could have some vague forms of attachment issues, but more so feelings of grief. And he could have been facing issues of lack of identity, especially with his racial and cultural background. I'm sure Fanny tried to connect with Alex in many ways. Besides his gaming and technology, this probably included also his racial and cultural identity. But nonetheless, that still has to be hard as a single mother who's the only one raising an adopted child. Especially when Fanny didn't tell Alex anything about his biological parents. This doesn't help how society and Fanny's co-workers in particular may treat them both directly or indirectly. While Alex does seem sociable, we're not sure if he's made other friends or close friends at his school or in his general life. Especially since he's more focused on tech, which does give him a creative outlet. And because he learned more about tech, he was able to connect himself better to his biological parents. Especially with enhancing the image that he believes are his parents. In the game, he does get doubt if his parents are dead in the encounter Beep Boop Beep. It doesn't linger in any other encounters afterwards, but that thought to have is scary. The Brigades, and finding information about his biological parents, has consumed his whole summer and likely changed the way he thinks. His mindset likely quickly shifted from feeling hate or indifference to the Brigades to being more open about them and hating Fanny and the government for trying to tell him otherwise. That swinging feeling was likely influenced by the fact that he knew nothing about them and that Fanny kept that secret from him. Getting in touch with Robert and John, who Robert especially saw talent in Alex's skills, made him gravitate towards the Brigades more. I think this comment that Alex can make here is also a factor to consider.
Guess I got radical blood coursing through these veins.
Not all traits can be passed down, but it could be him remembering vague bits from when Naomi and Stephen were alive, since he knew they were in the Black Brigades at the age of 4, but repressed that memory later on. What's worse is that his role is defined for him by John, Robert, and the Brigades, unfortunately. I would say more so by Robert, and I think that Robert was one of the first few people to reach out to Alex, possibly through a connection he had besides John. In Mile Zero, on the table when Kaito meets Robert for the first time, there are pictures of both Alex and of Naomi and Stephen. Oddly enough, this picture of them is the same image that Alex found and enhanced. This makes me think that either Alex had met someone else that reported directly to Robert, and had shown them this picture, asking if they were his parents. And Robert finds out about this and is impressed by his skills, and after confirming that they were his parents, and potentially recognizing Alex early on, recruited him through that connection to become a brigade. Or, and the one that I feel like seems more likely given Robert's creepo nature, had kept tabs on Alex shortly after he was adopted, and maybe had another picture of Naomi and Stephen himself, then gotten one of his members to meet up with Alex. This is also supported by the fact that he has a picture of Alex. To be fair, he could have just taken it for reference himself after he was recruited to show it to John so he could know who he decided to recruit, but either way. Robert used that leverage of knowing the Kims over Alex, and Alex isn't making any progress into finding out who they are. He doesn't get the results he wants quickly, and he only just wants to make games. Working for the Brigade starts to lead him down the same path his parents went. It feels like for Alex, no one is listening to him, either because he's a kid, a Brigade, or because of a past involving his parents that he has no control over. He does get some venting moments with John, but he doesn't fully talk about his relationship with his adopted mom. And with Fanny, he does find comfort in talking to her, but he can't talk about what exactly he's trying to do to get the information. Meeting the teens on the road, either through a bit of Zoe or through the player character in Road 96, allows him to express his anger and how no one is helping him in the way he wants them to help him. And through these times, we get a stronger idea of who he is, even if he doesn't realize it himself, or can't, given the circumstances. By the end of the game, he figures himself out a bit more, putting him in a better place of mind.
Steal as much as you can.
Yeah, we do that a lot.
Nah, I'm pretty sure we'd still steal.
Before we begin this segment, I'd just like to apologize in advance. Stan and Mitch's segment is undoubtedly going to be shorter than the rest of the characters. Sorry, Stan and Mitch fans.
I know it's real.
Now, this isn't to say that these guys aren't deep characters or that they don't have repressed trauma in some way, because they do, honestly. Stan and Mitch Sanchez are two brother robbers that have made themselves known as the most robbers ever.
Mitch, give me that bag for the loot!
The bag? I thought you had it.
Mitch! You shut your pie hole! The piggy bank! Put the money in the piggy bank!
A laundromat robbery happened about an hour ago.
Ah, jeez.
Witnesses say the two robbers, both dressed like they were into S&M role-playing, argued the entire time. Though the suspect only made off with $72 in quarters, they are said to be armed and very dangerous. If you see them, please call the police immediately.
We're laughing stocks? You wanna throw some money? You're a genius! Got a better idea?
Starting their career in 1986, they pulled about 6 to 7 robberies by the time Election Day comes after their initial robbery at the Video 99 store. They even want to get their sister in on the robberies too, but she didn't want to join them. They continue to be your average entrepreneurial robbers, and we see how their career has skyrocketed in 1996, pulling some of the finest robberies such as robbing a Super Supper and a laundromat. Okay, but for real, they also did rob First Petria National, so that's pretty sick in all honesty. Besides pulling robberies, their main goal by 1996 is to protect Sonia Sanchez from an attempted assassination, often finding clues from the killer himself as to where and when he'll attack, and what he looks like. They can eventually meet up with Sonia before the attack occurs, or they just watch her report from home. It does show by the end credits that they are talking with Sonia again. I'd say that Stan and Mitch are better off between all the characters, but they're still in need of desperate help, especially when looking for information about Sonia's would-be killer. Their lifestyle, in a way, was almost predetermined for them. Growing up as orphans, they had to scrape to get by. I'm sure when they were younger, they likely did some small shoplifting for food and whatnot. They probably had some schooling, assuming they lived in an orphanage that provided it, but otherwise they're likely lacking in certain aspects of education and life lessons. My only real supporting argument, besides Matthew's take on how they did grow up as orphans, is that Sonia seemingly does not know how to drive a car, as per the Worlds Apart encounter. And we never see her drive anyways, because she's just chauffeured around. It's either that, or she was just heavily intoxicated, and then she crashed a limo. It's more likely the latter now that I'm saying it out loud. But just some more food for thought. Besides that, Sonia has mentioned in her encounters how she was once a poor, dirty teen. While this may be an inadvertent dig against the player, there's definitely merit to it. I see this as a way for her to express that she, and likely her brothers, did not have a place with functioning water, or didn't have access to hygiene products on the daily or fresh air clothing. So, if they were orphans and were living in an orphanage, it wasn't a good one. That, or they were living on the streets entirely. either possibility doesn't give them opportunities to receive proper education, and that they didn't have funds to do anything such as taking a driver's test or classes, either for driving or for school. But honestly, they wouldn't need him now, but for two very different reasons. Stan and Mitch probably learned to drive a motorcycle through experience, and Sonia gets driven around. I think this really went off tangent, but my whole point is that they didn't have access to important resources at an age where it is usually offered, because of their financial and home status. When Tyrek was elected, it was the year 1976. This would make Stan and Mitch 16 and Sonia 13. I'm sure the shift in policies was gradual, but the odds might have still been stacked against them more. As stated by Stan's actor, Stan and Mitch are said to be extremely loyal to their blood. I would imagine that, no matter what got thrown at them as they were children, they decided to put everything they got into making sure that Sonia, at the very least, was taken care of, as she was able to get a job as a weather reporter for GNN and then made her way up. We also see that they're apolitical.
Mitch and I prefer to remain, apolitical.
Which is intriguing, because Sonia is reporting for the state. But honestly, seeing as they are older than Sonia and had to slowly deal with the hardships of a growing dictatorship as they were teens, and then grew addicted to thievery, why give an opinion on a political world such as Petria when you have your own problems and are for no one, especially if no one was there for you? Throughout their encounters, besides seeing how dumb they are, it also shows that they're immensely smart, especially when it comes to figuring out who Sonia's would-be killer is. Yeah, sure, in the game they can't figure out the information right from the get-go, but I argued that it's situational because of what the player does, since they can hinder their ability of figuring out the identity. If you get all their encounters where they're trying to figure out who the killer is and only get two wrong, they still show up during one of Sonia's recordings to stop the killer from trying anything, even though he wasn't going to by the end of it. And I believe if you don't get those encounters, they still show up anyways. In any case, they're still dedicated to protecting Sonia. And what's unfortunate is that they can't let anyone else know in order to help her. They stick out like sore thumbs in any society, being robbers and all. Choosing no political alignment, they don't give a damn about anything else. And honestly, I think they prefer it to be that way. They're so used to taking care of Sonia and having the world against them, that they see it as their duty to protect Sonia at all costs. Society also wouldn't expect them to be smart, especially when Sonia is forced to call them idiots, more or less, on her show.
Has occurred on our roads. This time, the victim was one of the sponsors of our show, Super Supper. Bizarrely, I'm told the robbers used a pig to collect their funds. We don't often begin with a lighter story, but today we're doing just that. As we all know, criminals aren't always the brightest bulbs in the box. Well, earlier today, desperate to get away from police hot on their trail, two bumbling robbers threw the only thing they could at the police chasing them. That's right, the money they'd just stolen. Talk about throwing your money away.
Inadvertently, this can lead to members of Petrian society to not take them seriously as threats. But we see how that's incorrect, as they are incredibly smart at figuring out information about the killer, and are also competent enough to put up a fight, or at least aren't scared to back down. Not to mention, for a good duration of 1996 at least, as they're doing everything they can to protect Sonia and look for information about the would-be killer, they have to sit with that knowledge and fear, and could potentially have hard times functioning properly. And they already live in hideouts where it doesn't come with running water or food, so there's a chance they could be so engraved into their work and worry that they're not looking after themselves, like how they're probably used to when they took care of Sonia as kids. But assuming that your player makes the correct choices at any point during the encounters, where they try to find out information about the killer, they might take solace and pride that someone knows about their goals, and can even help them. Even praising the player for when they get something correct. Someone not an authoritative figure or even brigade, but just a team trying to scrape by. Much like how they were.
There was an explosion, and she was under the mountain peak. I tried to save her as the rocks came down. I did. But by the time I got there, well, it was too late. But enough of all that. That's enough crying for one day. Let's take this party to the next level.
Sonia Sanchez is Petria's #1 reporter. She started her career at GNN as a weather reporter. In the prologue book, it shows that she is used to doing harder work, like trying to push the van out of the mud. She makes headway into stardom after doing a weather report for GNN during the election day in 1986, where they caught the peak collapse on camera. It was at this point that she tried to save Lola, but couldn't. We see in Mile Zero, About a Girl, and in Road 96, how she enjoys partying. Whether in White Sands, hosting parties for the residents there, on the road in her limo, or at fundraisers for Tyrek. But she also takes any excuse to party, such as in the car ride with the teen in Worlds Apart. She meets Adam in Mile Zero and hires him to be a bodyguard. Whether she had one prior, I'm not sure. She definitely had a driver though. Regardless, this does tie into the general idea that Sonya does not care about her safety. Not that much anyway. Which is detrimental in Road 96 because the stalker has been prevalent in many locations she's been in within the summer, as he plans to kill her soon. She has also received letters and death threats every day for the last 10 years. Sonya also struggles with excessive drug use and alcohol use, trying to do everything she can to not remember the attack of 86 and how Lola died before her eyes. Although the book does identify Lola to be a brigade, it seems like she isn't aware of this fact, or maybe she doesn't care. Either way, she remembers her constantly. During one of her later reports, Sonya ends up meeting with Stan and Mitch again, as they stop the would-be killer. She gives her report on election day, and overall, her story comes to a close, as in the end, she still reconnects with her brothers. I will say this, arguably Stan, Mitch, and Sonya are the only characters to receive a happy ending by the end of the game, regardless of what ending you get. Jared gets that too, but Sonya, Stan, and Mitch don't have to deal with the burden knowing that they killed people, since they didn't. But that'll be covered more slightly in his section. And kind of related, but there is a scrap point I made within my ranking video where I talked about how I feel like Stan, Mitch, Sonya, and Jared all have a rather quick story, especially Sonya, since their storylines get resolved by the time the 15 reaches the border. Obviously endings can happen earlier, especially when telling multiple stories at once, but with Sonya I feel like it honestly has no further advancement. While there is some character progression, mainly between her and her brothers, and besides some differing dialogue, we don't see her story change all that much. It makes sense for Stan and Mitch to continue looking for the information about the killer or continue robbing because they don't know if he'll attack, or in the case of robbing, it's because it's who they are. Jared still has his other goal of getting Robert, so his story still continues. I guess it just feels jarring because as a whole, their storyline is both not the total main focus of the game, but also because it ends quicker than John, Fanny, and Alex's storyline. And I'm also assuming part of it was due to the game's release time frame. I have this theory that Sonya was originally supposed to die by Jared in a scrap ending variation when the 15 reaches the border, mainly based on his audio file. Bubble border is used for dialogue that is set at the border and basically towards the end of the game. Here's the audio.
Yeah, just got something in my eye. Come on, let's do this.
This likely would have been said in place of Sonya talking about Lola. I also feel like Jared's statement in the game is vague enough to where it could be said after he kills Sonya or not. Not to mention when Stan and Mitch aren't at the border, Sonya uses lines from Worlds Apart that are played instead. There's always a chance that what I'm saying could be false or off the mark. And I don't want to come off as if I'm utterly disappointed in what we still have in the game. I am veering off topic, but in hindsight, as I look back at my ranking video, when I offered ideas to change up certain encounters and talk about scrap concepts, I'm worried that I was coming across as DigitArt should have added those in from the get-go. And I'm worried that I was coming across as if I wasn't considering the time that goes into making any game. I don't think I realistically came across that way, and I think it's just the people pleaser in me showing, but I'm sorry if I did. Once again, any points that I make are just merely criticisms and me getting into discussion about the game. Within game developments or any projects, a lot of factors are at play. I can give criticisms or make suggestions that seem good in hindsight, but in the end that's all they are, especially since I only play the game, and the devs are most likely aware of these points in general. So overall, it is what it is. Nevertheless, there's still a lot to cover with Sonya. Sonya, in particular with her disenfranchised grief, is also dealing with immense survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is a response to an event in which someone else experienced loss but you did not. It is the feeling of thinking that you have done something wrong by surviving a traumatic or tragic event, especially when others didn't. And honestly, you can make the point that the whole cast has survivor's guilt in some way, and also PTSD, and you would be correct. I think the biggest examples of survivor's guilt would be Fanny, John, and Sonya, arguably. But unlike Fanny, who has a general sense of duty to protect those as a cop, Sonia had the duty, quote-unquote, to save Lola. And while John faces this issue with Connie as well, it seems like he at least has better coping mechanisms and people to at least surround himself with, even if some of his relationships are strained. Sonia also uses direct wording to express how she hates that she's alive instead of Lola.
For your information, Aunt Sonia doesn't like herself very much either.
It's just... sometimes I wish I had died. And she'd lived.
I mentioned this in the ranking video, but I definitely think that Sonia does have some suicidal ideation, or could potentially be suicidal. This could have stemmed either from her survivor's guilt from the attack, or just as a whole living a rough lifestyle without her brothers, with unhealthy coping mechanisms, and how she doesn't give attention to her own general safety in some cases. It's probably a mixture of both. Sonia uses drinking, drugs, and partying to feel happy, or at the very least, to distract herself and to forget the pain long enough to get sick or to get to her next recording session for her show. I also think that John working in the brigades and realizing his environment is toxic, as well as finding solace in Fanny and Alex, really helps him move on. Sonia, on the other hand, is stuck in a bad work environment where she has to smile for the camera, literally and figuratively. And I think knows that there's no real integrity to her job, but she still wants that security within her job. And her job and those in power don't fully respect Sonia either, such as making her use an accentless voice for her show, or how the president at the time regards Sonia in the classified government document. Which is minute, and I'm probably reading into it too much, but I think it still shows that as long as they censor her and give her a script, then she's fine. But if she didn't follow through with it, or didn't do what she was told, she'd be out in a heartbeat. Case in point, how she's giving faulty weather reportings because JNN told her to in the prologue book. This is ingrained into her mentality because she doesn't want to go back to her old lifestyle of being on the streets. So, besides her work environment and her interpersonal relationships, she feels grief from Lola's death that is noticeably unchecked. She also likely feels guilt for not being there for her brothers and not being able to provide for them, even with her new lifestyle. She also doesn't have her brothers by her side. All of this makes her incredibly lonely. Sonia can't exactly bring up her childhood or her siblings. Everyone in Petria has high expectations and standards for her, and the country does not favor those who are not well off. And I'm sure if Sonia did openly talk about her past, they'd probably just use it as a way to showcase an underdog story without actually supporting any underdogs. She only recently just met Adam, so there's only so much she's willing to vent to him about, presumably. She actually does explain it outright to Adam, if Stan and Mitch meet up with her, that they are related, which is nice. But she probably couldn't do it early on. She's not going to be able to talk to her brothers in full, as they are criminals, who also don't fall under a political alignment. So if anyone sees her with them, they may assume the worst about her. So in general, there's not a lot of opportunity in her daily life to talk about her brothers, or her past. And realistically, she probably does not like remembering how she was poor. She could vent about Lola, how she does feel directly responsible for her death and wishes she had died instead. Which she does do with the makeup artist when the 15 reaches the border, if only briefly. And again, she could talk about this with Adam or Stan and Mitch. But without her brother, she doesn't have easy access to do that. And again, she might not talk about her trauma with Adam early on. But if everyone else knows that Lola was identified as a brigade, what does that say about Sonia, a GNN figurehead, who wishes she had died in place of a brigade? Maybe some fans of hers will be on her side, but any diehard fans of Tyrek will immediately shun Sonia out, and GNN would openly cast Sonia out. Brigade and Flora supporters could shun her out as well, because she is a symbol for Tyrek. There's retroactively no place for Sonia to go if she loses her job at GNN. It's also rough because she's also an authoritative figure that isn't male or white. I know I keep bringing up sexism and racism a lot, but quite frankly, it's important to consider when it's the 90s in a tyrannical government that's been operating under the same guy for 2 decades. And something to note, there's this comment made about Senator Flores. How this one woman notes that it's bold for Senator Flores to go against Tyrek. That really does not bode well at all for what could happen to Sonia, if she were ever to go out against Tyrek. And much like with Zoe and Fanny, and for that matter the rest of the cast, she probably wouldn't get good therapy. And I doubt she would want to anyways. At least in her current state, how she doesn't have a strong enough support system like her brothers. Despite all these setbacks, she is able to vent with the player. both during her drunken episode, which she does try to push away and forget afterwards, but also during her downtime moments. And overall does pass on to the player direct and indirect advice from her personal experiences. With the player, she's able to talk about her brothers a bit more freely, albeit somberly, because it's been presumably years since she last saw them. With Lola, it's harder for her to talk about, and she'd much rather forget the conversation. But I think it all does push her in the end to be more open about what happened to Lola and how she felt about it overall. There's hope for her to overcome the survivor's guilt after 10 long years.
They're fans of hers. Twisted. Hey, something's wrong with your doors. Stop what? I wasn't doing anything.
Quite frankly, not a lot is known about Jared Thompson. At least, not his past anyway. We see him briefly when he tries to get Lola back in the car in the 1986 prologue book, where your character Lupe stops him, as he's clearly hurting her or is otherwise trying to force her into the car using aggressive methods. He wasn't at the peak when it collapsed, so he hears about Lola dying through the news reports, and consequently sees Lola's death on screen for the next decade. Between 1986 and 1996, he becomes a serial killer, killing anyone he thinks will get in his way, with the end goal of killing Sonia, who he thinks left Lola to die, and Robert Winters, her former biology teacher that recruited her in the first place. He makes brief appearances in Mile Zero and About a Girl, the form I'll be getting into later, and during Road 96, he actively stalks Sonia and keeps tabs on Robert. In the end, after learning of Sonia's innocence and guilt, he sets on killing Robert instead, and by the end of the game, he likely succeeds in his mission. This summary of him is pretty bare bones in comparison to the other casts, but as the player, you do see what he does, or what he can do, in his escapade to plan out his murders on Sonia and Robert. In the prologue book, in one of the endings, he can kill Flores presumably with a gun, and you witness him hitting Lola as he tries to drag her into the car. In Mile Zero, you can still see that he sends death threats to Sonia's direct mailbox, and is presumably about to kill this guy here. In About a Girl, he has a confirmed kill with a cop, and can kill Zoe in one of the bad endings. He can kill the player 4 times in Road 96, has kidnapped a guy in the motel in Suspicious Minds, kidnapped a brigade in Enjoy the Silence, kills a police officer and potentially Steve in Better Be Good to Me, kidnaps and presumably kills Robert, and likely since he became a serial killer, has killed more, and has implied to have done much worse things in Take Your Time, Do It Right, which I'm assuming involves general torture. His essential philosophy of killing is killing anyone that will get in his way of his end goal. All these actions stem from him losing Lola in the peak collapse. One thing that Cam said recently, which could be taken as a joke in all honesty, was that if Jared was an artist, he would have called what he's been doing an art performance. Now, if I were to take this at face first value, in the sense of him killing people and getting away with it, this would mean that he has killed for 10 years. I personally think that while he has sent Sonia hate mail for at least 10 years, the serious threatening letters and the killings don't actually start until 1993. As per the scribe letter/journal entry, he writes, where it states the following: August 12th, 1993. Everything bad in this life hit me in the face 3 days ago. I found the place where Lola was staying before the 1986 attack. I found an unopened letter she was unable to send me. This Black Brigade group is really a set. I don't understand why nobody isn't doing anything against them. Of course, you can take my interpretation with a grain of salt. Either way, at worst, he was killing for 10 years, or at the best, only 3 years. Regardless, if we were to take that statement in a metaphorically, or rhetorically, or poetically, or theoretically, or in any other fancy way, kind of a dead meme, I know. This really gives more insight into how Jared thinks about what he's doing. Now, an artist doesn't have to pertain to drawing, obviously. It could be used to describe artists working with different mediums, such as sculpting, filmmaking, or performing. In this case, I think we can easily connect Jared as a performer, and it wouldn't be too off-brand for him, actually. Jared will try to unease the player multiple times because it's easier for him to know what you're thinking if he scares you or threatens you. If you also make that connection with Lakme, and him calling himself Gerald after the British police officer in Lakme, I would say it does fit symbolically too. Now, Jared does not put on a happy facade, ever, but he does act as a man that doesn't have any secrets regarding his plans, and at the very least will try to act somewhat normally, at least to vaguely be passable in the eyes of society. I want to give attention to Diary 6, both what it says in the file itself and in the game. Jared Diary 6, game file version. February 16th, 1994. Loneliness has followed me my whole life. Everywhere. In buses, in cars, sidewalks, stores, everywhere. There's no escape. The days can go on with regularity over and over, one day indistinguishable from the next. A long, continuous chain. Then, suddenly, there's a change. Today, I've decided when I'll act. I've changed my mind a lot in the last month, but this time I'm sure. In-game version. February 16th, 1994. The days go on, one day indistinguishable from the next. Then, a moment of clarity. I've changed my mind one last time. I know when I'll act, I just don't know where. This does give a look into Jared's past, assuming he isn't just referring to the last 10 years, how he was rather a lonesome individual. Taken into account of the potentially scrapped idea that his face is paralyzed due to having taken anxiolytics and crashing his car, it does show how he was not stable within his mental health in the past. And he's not faring that much better currently. I theorize how mental health care here is likely more than subpar, which is probably influenced by how you are as a citizen. There's also the stigma in general that men have to keep up a facade of being strong and unbreakable in any hardship. Jared, presumably being a single father, has gone through losing his daughter, not just to what is being labeled in the game as a terrorist attack, but through her teacher who recruited her. And as we see in About a Girl, he was under the assumption that she was attending a summer camp, which adds more salt in the wound. In my first video, and in this video, I talk about how Robert was manipulative and being a creep. And in my previous video, I mentioned how he would otherwise be classified as a groomer. I didn't outright say that, but I showed it on screen. I didn't outright say that because the video was a ranking video and that would be a heavy topic to get into fully, even though the video did rely on analyzing certain themes and scenes. And that is a heavy word to use, especially to victims of grooming, I would know. Honestly, looking back though, I should have said it outright. Robert's not stupid. He knows he can get kids on board with their cause because they're young. And he has that additional power of being an adult that was formerly a teacher, who presumably could make meaningful connections with his students. As we see how Jared remarked that Lola liked him. And Jared to an extent knows that Robert is using his power imbalance against teens. Or at least I would assume he thinks about that every day since she died, and that Lola was a victim of that. What is also upsetting is that he and Lola might have had a strained relationship before she died too. Taking a look at Diary 7, the game file version, there's this section. Today you would have been 23. Maybe I would have gotten you another of those plastic dinosaurs. Maybe a small plant. I'm sure you would have just liked both. Considering that we don't see Lola talk about another parental figure in her life, we can assume that Jared had to take on the role of both trying to be there for Lola, but also working to make ends meet. The latter was probably more common, potentially making him a more absent dad. There's also the fact that their last interaction wasn't good. He forcefully tries to get her back into the cab, and can even hit Lola. There's no excusing hitting your child, or for that matter all the other shit that Jared does. But I don't think, as it currently stands anyway, that Jared was abusive to Lola throughout her whole childhood, or at all. Based on the letter that Lola was planning on sending to Jared, it seems that in both versions, they were on okay enough terms. At least enough to where she would want to write to him. But there's likely hidden tension that we aren't aware of, especially since she went to meet up with the brigades without his knowledge. And after her death, for a long time, he's also under the assumption that Sonia aided in her death by not helping her, since the camera cuts off and the rocks fall onto Lola. Throughout all of the character sections, I emphasize that they normally don't have someone to talk to or vent about their trauma regarding the peak collapse, or there are various factors that prevent them from talking about it. Jared, obviously, is an excuse from this. In fact, I argue he has more hurdles than the rest of the main cast. He becomes alienated from Petria's society in many ways. One way is hating Sonia to the point of stalking her and planning on killing her. Assuming that fans of Sonia or fans of Tyrek found out about him hating Sonia, they wouldn't be fond of Jared. A second way is hating to the Brigades to the point of actively stalking, kidnapping, and killing Brigades. Any Brigade sympathizers or Brigades themselves will either retaliate against him or try to dissuade his thinking. Third way is Lola being a Brigade herself. If you open up about her death, and if Petria knows she's a Brigade, based on the ending of the prologue book, the Tyrek-centered country will not offer him condolences or pity, and any Brigades or sympathizers themselves may say she died for a cause. And lastly, he alienates himself by how he presents himself to the world, if he chooses to make himself known. Jared has essentially created two personas to dawn on his quote-unquote stage. One is that of a stone-faced man, where he remains quiet, reserved, and represses everything. The other is that of an angry, threatening man, who will purposely exaggerate his manners to drive everyone else away. In a way, respectively, I would label each of these personas as sad and angry. On the outside, this is probably how Petria as a whole views him. And this is what you can call him in Praying for Time, a sad, angry man. And in response, he'll just say this.
No, I'm a sad, angry man with a gun. See the difference?
This is both his funniest line that he has, and it's his most harrowing line. He doesn't dispute that claim, he only clarifies it to you, that he is a sad, angry man. But he's also very much a threat, and he wants you to know that. Jared recognizes that his behavior is destructive, or doesn't argue otherwise. Such as when the team makes the comment and now you hate in Beat It, he merely grumbles. You tell him up front and better be good to me that he's crazy, and he says maybe a little. He keeps up his self-destructive and destructive behavior, and if anyone in Petria finds out about his crimes, no matter who they are, they will not give him the time or day. Society prevents him from talking about Lola's death in full. And so does he. Because in that sense, of only letting someone else know surface-level things about you and mask certain emotions, and even purposely scaring others, it almost is easier for him to understand what everyone else is thinking, and he doesn't want to let anyone else in. He's engaging in the performance of a lifetime, as he both acts as a nobody and as a threat, in order to achieve his end goals. But even then, those facades and personas of himself will slip. He can be persuaded into not killing the player in Praying for Time if you are closer to death and choose the right options. He does give you overall opportunities to live in encounters like Take Your Time, Do It Right, or Beat It, urging the player to move on away from him. He warns you not to call a taxi and roll with it, trying to prevent you from meeting him again. And about a girl, he does show concern for Zoe's safety despite not knowing her. Which, by the way, I love the connection of Zoe basically being like Lola. I really love that it was utilized in About a Girl. And will even kill the police officer in order to ensure that Zoe does not get arrested. And in the end, he doesn't kill Sonia once he learns her side of the story. And doesn't pursue Stan or Mitch after they knock him down. He probably heard they were related. So he likely understands their reasoning as to why they were so hell-bent in protecting her. Throughout the whole story, you, as the player, learn about Jared in increments across various teens, and are able to get a better idea as to how he likely is underneath his performance. You can offer him chance to vent, even if the times he is venting he is just shouting and directing his anger towards you. But some of that venting could be reasonable in a skewed way. He's been holding in his anger for the last decade. Or at least channeling that anger into either unhealthy coping mechanisms or into something dangerous. You as the player have the chance to help him release some of that anger. Sometimes, even in a more productive way than what he's used to. And by the end of the game, it seemed to have worked. Maybe Jared will be able to let go of his grief or work through it because of you. Throughout this video, I place emphasis on the player. But why? Why am I presenting the player as the driving force? What does it mean to you, the player? Zenny's video, Road 96 is genius and here's why, and That Ding Dad's video, The Solidarity Politics of Road 96, illustrates a collective point, oddly enough, that your singular actions are not important, but they do impact the story as a whole. As per Zenny's line, "You are not important, and that's the point," and highlighting the fact that it's the actions of the many that bring people together. One comment in That Ding Dad's video, how one team treats people in one round can affect their decisions in later rounds, both coincide with the idea that, throughout all your actions, they shape the country and its people. And I believe it all affects their degrees of disenfranchised grief. And as you progress through the story, you start to realize the distinction between character and player. As noted in Skyblack's video, Why I Love Road 96, the video explains the difference between player versus character within a story. Essentially, the character, being the Teen Crossing, knows only pieces of the character's story, but the player understands the bigger picture. And as a player, you're here to be the collective society that changes everything about Petria. There's the quote in the About a Girl book to further that point, when Fanny is talking to Zoe as she's detained. Alex thinks he can solve everything, but you can't change everyone's mind. No, that's true. But if everyone changes themselves, it changes everything. The characters have had a horrible summer. The last 10 years have been grueling. But even if some of them don't want to acknowledge it, you come along, and you change everything. I mentioned earlier that the cast stands out because they have diverse backgrounds and ideologies that form the way they think, that overall go against Petria society. And I believe that also includes you, the player. You can make unique choices according to your playstyle, and you can shape the outcome of Petria by your actions, or collective actions across the characters you play as, which is the highlight of the game, as explained perfectly in Zenny's and That Ding Dad's videos. So, does this have anything to do with disenfranchised grief? Yeah. As both a character and player, you get put through the ringer. A lot.
Take care of yourself, okay? The roads can be mean.
Okay, but seriously though. In the end, it shows that your efforts are either futile, or you succeed in changing Petria. For the better. There's political change that your player brings, but you bring emotional change as well. The change that you start to bring all hurts to look at through a singular character's perspective. You learn the character's hardships over the course of several teens. This is what shapes you from being a character to a player. Looking at it through a character's perspective, only one teen gets to experience little bits of the character's story. It's overall narrow. The first teen that you play as, who may meet Zoe at the campground, get picked up by John in his truck where he talks about asking out Fanny, and meets Fanny in the motel as she's looking for the brigade transmitter, then reaches the border, will never know that Zoe gets arrested shortly afterwards, that John botches his date with Fanny, and that Fanny hasn't seen Alex since the start of the summer, and that Alex has been working for the brigades to get information about his parents. The next teen might meet Stan and Mitch during the Super Supper robbery, get picked up by Sonia in her limo as she drives by protesters, insulting them, then gets killed by Jared in the motel. That teen will never know that Stan and Mitch are also looking for information about the killer after Sonia, who will stop at nothing to succeed in his goal, that Sonia harbors guilt about Lola's death, and that Jared is Lola's father, and he harbors anger towards any brigade and anyone in his way. And you cannot tell them at any point the full picture. The story won't let you, because you're playing across as different people. They will only know what's being presented to them. Even when you're given some opportunities to make connections with other characters, the game only allows you to go so far with it, with just the team you're currently playing as. You get to see their stories unfold, and you, singularly, are powerless to do anything to help them. Your character, even at times, could possibly further their disenfranchised grief, because you only engage with them for so long before you head to the border. And yet, Collectively, you can help shape them as better individuals. Despite what you go through, you still persist, and you're the change that's needed within the country and its citizens. You learn about the characters' struggles and what they go through, all through different lenses. You have the chance with the main cast, who are all victims of disenfranchised grief, to be that lending ear that they so desperately need. You, as the player, can change their disenfranchised grief into grief. And by the end of the game, as you're healing the country of Petria, you heal the characters, all through your actions and decisions. It's refreshing to see their stories come to a close, especially when it's a happy ending. You help them move on, as you move on the road to the border.
I'm gonna miss you, Z.
I'll miss you too, Kay.
He was trying to protect me.
Look, I screwed up. I became a part of something that turned bad. Not a day goes by that I don't regret it. But I'm a different person now. I want to be with you.
I'm a cop, and you're a wanted criminal. Forgive me, but I don't see how that could work.
Mom, look around. Things are happening. Change is happening. Give John another chance. He screwed up, but we all make mistakes. You, for instance.
Me?
Yeah, I mean, come on, Mom. You know what Tyrek is doing to teens.
I do. Yes.
You really want to keep working for a government that does that?
No! I haven't wanted to do my job for a long time now. But I did it. For you.
Well, you no longer have to, Mom! Now please, lower your gun!
We can cross together. There's nothing keeping us here. We can leave.
This is for you, Lola.
Lola was her name. I tried. I tried to save her. But the rocks, they kept coming. It's just, sometimes I wish I had died. And she lived.
Oh, Sonia.
He's gone. Not a problem. We'll be here on election day, if he comes back.
Yeah, we'll be here.
Stan! Aw, Mitch. Oh, I'm sorry I've been so distant. I hope you can forgive me.
Don't worry about it, Sonia.
Yeah, don't worry. We're a family.
Aw, you guys are the best. Now give me another hug.
That leaves just the brigades. Time to cut the head off the snake.
Though it's far too early to tell what the future of my country holds, for the first time in many years, there is hope. And that, at the very least, is a good place to start.
Thank you guys for watching, and congrats on making it to the end of the video. This was a topic I was very eager to discuss, and I honestly said mostly everything that I need to say about the game as a whole. But I still got some thoughts about the characters and, in general, video ideas about Route 96. Which I'll still do. I'm mainly just thinking about how I want to structure some of them, especially if they're analysis related. I do have some other video ideas in the video analysis range. Besides a few of them, I'm not in a real rush to get them out. so I'll mainly just be playing it by ear when I upload next. As I mentioned before, check out the game and support the devs in any way you can. Again, here's my sources cited for the video. This might as well be a trend for my future videos. I'll again link the videos I mentioned in the description, especially since I did showcase a bit of their footage for reference, and talked about them more. I will see you all on my future projects. Thank you for watching.